The precise moment when the established tranquility of North Rodeo Drive shattered into something altogether more electrifying occurred at exactly 41 minutes past 3 in the afternoon, on the 7th day of February, in the year 2026. The atmosphere, usually characterized by a muted, sophisticated grandeur befitting its locale, abruptly became supercharged, crackling with an almost tangible, high-voltage energy. Into this charged environment moved Meghan Markle, her visage deliberately obscured by lenses so dark they seemed to swallow the light, enveloped entirely within a bespoke cape coat the color of pristine ivory, an outer garment that seemed to hum with an unspoken tale of hushed, considerable wealth. She proceeded with an air of measured elegance, the kind of calculated grace belonging to someone entirely accustomed to the world bending to accommodate her arrival, anticipating that every heavy portal would swing open obediently even before her feet reached the very threshold. She was fully prepared for the expected choreography of elite, high-end retail engagement. The subtle, deferential murmur of welcome, the smooth, immediate escort into a private sanctuary reserved for exclusive clientele, and the unwavering, almost worshipful attention of a senior executive from the boutique's hierarchy. However, the welcome she anticipated was utterly absent, replaced instead by a barrier of such historical improbability that it seemed to defy all previous conventions. Standing directly between her and the legendary storefront, where the famous hardware bearing the interlocking double C emblem gleamed enticingly, were a pair of security personnel. These men stood with an unwavering solidity, as silent and utterly unyielding as if they had been hewn directly from a massive block of gray granite. There was no welcoming smile offered, no hurried, apologetic scramble to fetch a floor manager to attend to the esteemed visitor. Instead, one of the sentinels, a man whose career had assuredly involved observing countless celebrated personalities pass through that very entranceway, simply held her gaze and delivered a pronouncement consisting of 10 perfectly chosen words that were destined, in the immediate future, to send reverberations shaking through the very bedrock of the global garment trade. We have been instructed not to accommodate you at this time. For an individual who had, until this very moment, been widely lauded as the very embodiment of contemporary inspiration for venerable heritage fashion houses, this constituted a staggering, profoundly public demonstration of fortune's swift reversal. This specific incident transcended any simple misunderstanding or minor clerical error. It was emphatically not the result of a scheduling conflict concerning an appointment, nor was it attributable to the establishment being temporarily closed for a prearranged private function. In stark reality, what transpired was the direct and absolute execution of a conscious, definitive, and globally disseminated directive that had journeyed all the way from the venerable central headquarters of Chanel, situated upon the storied Rue Cambon in Paris. This particular resolution was so exceptionally rare and so devastatingly final that those few individuals privy to the inner workings of the fashion house itself spoke of it in hushed tones, referring to it only as the nuclear option. Within the rarefied and intense lexicon of the House of Chanel, this gesture signified something far more profound than a mere denial of admittance. It represented nothing less than a complete and utter institutional act of erasure. Interested parties are strongly encouraged to subscribe to the channel without delay to ensure they remain fully apprised of every development in this rapidly unfolding saga of high fashion intrigue. A significant assembly of onlookers, including members of the neighboring establishment's staff from the Dior boutique, bore silent witness as the Duchess appeared to undergo a visible transformation, her demeanor stiffening as if turning to cold marble. Her fingers remained locked in the act of composing a message upon her mobile device, her entire physical form becoming rigid and unyielding beneath the intense, uncompromising glare of the bright California sunshine. For a span of several moments, the resultant silence that descended upon the scene was absolutely agonizing in its intensity. Then, the meticulously maintained composure began, visibly, to fracture and dissolve. Witnesses present at that exact juncture later recounted that she commenced pacing with the repetitive, almost mechanical stride of a wind-up toy doll, her vocal projections steadily increasing in volume as she urgently placed a desperate telephone call intended for Prince Harry. One particular bystander distinctly recalled hearing her voice raised in a shout directed into the receiver, issuing vehement declarations that certain unnamed individuals would swiftly face termination from their positions, while vehemently asserting that absolutely no single person possessed the prerogative or the right to subject her to such a profound public humiliation. In a mere span of time equaling 20 full minutes, Harry arrived at the designated place, his complexion having entirely lost its natural hue, leaving it starkly pale, and his lower jaw was held rigidly set, forming a tight, tense line across his features. He made a concerted effort to initiate a meaningful exchange, an attempt at dialogue with the individual serving as the security chief, yet this man responded with nothing more than a single, unwavering and resolute shake of his head, a gesture that conveyed absolute finality. There would be absolutely no allowance for any deviation whatsoever from the established, stringent protocol. This rule applied inflexibly not even for a duke, nor for a duchess, and most assuredly not for any other person who might present themselves. As the digital lenses belonging to 3 separate onlookers began their mechanical task of recording the proceedings, meticulously documenting those 12 complete minutes of enforced social exile, the gathered public started to absorb a profoundly new and unsettling reality. The delicate velvet cord that once signified access had not simply been drawn shut in a gentle manner. It had been violently surged with an infusion of high-voltage electrical power, making any approach utterly impossible. Concealed behind the facade of public visibility, an extraordinarily extensive file, built up meticulously over time, had been completely assembled, and the distinguished president of the fashion division, whose name is Bruno Pavlovsky, had already affixed his official signature to the final, unalterable decree. This official action signified the formal commencement of the ultimate and complete conclusion of Meghan Markle's connections to the most rarefied and exclusive gatherings within the Parisian elite circles. The grand entrance to that sanctuary had effectively been bolted shut and barred, and for the very first time across a span of several years, the narrative surrounding these events was no longer being penned or dictated by her influence. The public humiliation that was so starkly witnessed upon North Rodeo Drive represented merely the visible surface vibration, the tremor, if you will, of a massive underlying tectonic shift that had actually taken place many months before this moment, deep within the heavily fortified, stone-walled corridors of influential institutions in France. In order to truly and thoroughly comprehend the rationale behind why the most storied and venerable fashion institution upon the entire planet elected to subject a duchess to such a visibly pronounced degradation, it becomes necessary to delve deeply into the highly classified, top-secret files maintained by the internal brand integrity unit situated at the esteemed House of Chanel. In the secretive background, the choice that was made was anything but random or erratic. Rather, it represented the culmination and the inevitable end result of a dossier so voluminous in its documentation and so utterly catastrophic in its content that those individuals privy to its contents on the inside had assigned it the ominous moniker of the nuclear file. One should certainly take the time to subscribe to the channel, as a means of securing further deep analytical dives and revelations concerning the secret archives of prominent luxury brands. The initial, serious widening of this fracture began to manifest its destructive potential 14 full months preceding the tense standoff that occurred in Beverly Hills, specifically on the 5th day of December, in the year 2024. Meghan had made an arrival at the Chanel workshop located in Paris under the guise of an intimate, private tour intended to investigate what her accompanying associates termed a cultural partnership. Nevertheless, according to the accounts provided by 4 former employees who were present on the premises that particular day, the atmosphere within the space turned frigid and unwelcoming within the span of mere minutes. Meghan did not enter the premises as a mere patron or a welcomed guest of the institution. Rather, she conducted herself with an air as though she were the newly designated and appointed creative director of the entire operation. Sources familiar with the situation indicate that she was absolutely adamant about gaining access to view the secret design blueprints that pertain to the highly anticipated 2025 Métiers d'Art collection, a level of access that is almost never, under any circumstances, extended to individuals situated outside the company's innermost circle. When the esteemed curators of the archives began to exhibit understandable signs of reluctance concerning this request, she reportedly commenced issuing a series of unsolicited and authoritative commands. She offered the suggestion, quite freely, that the venerable fashion house ought to decisively shed what she critically characterized as its inherent French rigidity in order to achieve a far better resonance and connection with a modern and compassionate public. In what proved to be the most jarring and unexpected turn of events during the entire visit, She allegedly put forth a formal petition for a specific, intricate silk decorative border to be permanently renamed in her personal honor, suggesting, quite boldly, that her own individual identity represented the vital, missing component required to complete the century-old, established heritage of Chanel. One particular employee, who understandably requested complete anonymity for their recollection, remembered with perfect clarity the precise second when the entire assembly within the room descended into a profound and dead silence. She failed entirely to grasp the fundamental truth that Chanel does not exist as a mere nursery or playground designed for the inflated egos of famous individuals. It is, instead, a true cathedral of unparalleled style, and within the sacred confines of a cathedral, one does not presume to instruct the ordained clergy on the proper execution of the established liturgy. This singular, highly revealing visit served as the ultimate breaking point in a persistent pattern of conduct that had been systematically recorded and documented since the early months of the year 2023. The comprehensive collection of documents that were later scrutinized with intense focus by the board of directors featured a sequence of intercepted electronic messages in which the official representatives acting on Meghan's behalf insisted, with unyielding firmness, upon receiving co-creative credit for an exclusive, restricted-release handbag collection. They were not content with merely seeking a simple, cooperative arrangement. Instead, they were vociferously demanding a permanent place at the very high table occupied by the esteemed Wertheimer family itself. As the final days of the month of December in the year 2024 drew to a close, the solemn authorization for what was termed a retrait definitive, that is to say, a permanent withdrawal, was formally granted by the esteemed Bruno Pavlovsky, who presides as the president of the fashion division at the venerable house of Chanel. This particular decree represents the most stringent measure available within the brand's extensive arsenal of disciplinary actions, a measure reserved exclusively for those individuals who are deemed to have fundamentally betrayed the deep intellectual trust reposed in them by the fashion house, or for those whose very presence poses what the internal guidelines term a significant risk of public relations pollution. The directive issued was absolute and comprehensive in its scope. It mandated a complete prohibition on admittance to any establishment, a cessation of all loaning privileges for merchandise, the halting of all future bookings, and, with the utmost gravity, the severance of any conceivable public association whatsoever. The repercussions of this decision were felt with immediate, though initially discreet, force throughout the relevant circles. The esteemed name of the Duchess was swiftly and silently expunged from the official roster of invited guests slated for the forthcoming exhibition scheduled to take place in the city of Manchester. Across various regional management offices, directives were disseminated, designated as a Level 1 non-engagement directive, which unequivocally characterized her status as persona non grata across the entirety of the global operational territories of the company. While the broader public might still observe the Duchess adorning exquisite high-fashion creations, the conoscenti and the elite stratum of the industry were in fact witnessing a meticulous, almost surgical process of a woman being systematically erased from the very ledgers and records of the fashion establishment. Behind the closed doors of executive meetings, the preferred nomenclature used to describe her precarious situation was that she had become tactically uninsurable. This severe judgment stemmed not merely from the catalogue of demands she had presented, but rather from the profound element of unpredictability she introduced into a highly structured domain that thrives and operates upon the unwavering currency of consistency and meticulous caution. Chanel had arrived at the profound and unavoidable realization that with every single occasion that Meghan Markle entered a venue or commanded attention, the focus of the discourse invariably shifted away from the inherent artistry of the creations or the garments themselves, becoming entirely and exclusively centered upon her persona. For a house that has demonstrated remarkable resilience, successfully navigating the turbulent waters of two devastating global conflicts and countless economic upheavals by steadfastly maintaining a position above the ephemeral clamor, the specific variety of viral controversy that seemed to follow Meghan was perceived as an existential threat to the corporation's long-cherished honor. Consequently, the highly publicized confrontation that transpired in Beverly Hills on the 7th day of February in the year 2026 was emphatically not the result of a minor lapse in judgment by some junior security officer. Rather, it was the very public execution of a judicial sentence that had been formally passed down a full year prior, deep within the strategic heart of the French capital. The metaphorical locks had been firmly engaged, the security bolts thrown home, and for the very first time in her public life, the Duchess encountered an impenetrable threshold that no measure of royal lineage or commanding media influence possessed the power to unfasten. It is vital for all followers to remember to subscribe to the channel so that this unfolding narrative, rich with consequence and high-stakes maneuvering, is not missed in any of its subsequent developments. The public skirmish witnessed on Rodeo Drive served as the final explosive culmination, yet the initial spark, the igniting fuse, had been laid down 3 long years earlier during a period now recalled in hushed, reverent tones within the sophisticated fashion capitals of both Paris and New York as the mood board war. This era spanned several intense months within the middle of the year 2023. A critical juncture when the ambitious, grand designs championed by the Duchess of Sussex collided head-on with the unyielding, historical bulwark that constitutes the legacy of Chanel. This intense friction transcended a mere superficial disagreement over aesthetic preferences. It represented a fundamental, ideological schism between two entirely antithetical philosophies regarding the nature and deployment of influence. It was in the month of May of 2023 that the business counselor representing Meghan at Archewell, the individual known as Vanessa Lauren, formally initiated a line of communication with the United States Media Liaison Office of Chanel. The intermediary chosen to bridge this significant gap was Zara Carmichael, a former public relations specialist previously associated with Goop, who possessed a well-regarded reputation for successfully brokering sensitive agreements between prominent Hollywood personalities and established European luxury conglomerates. The essence of the proposition presented was extraordinarily audacious: the creation of a highly restricted-run, philanthropic collection tentatively titled Archewell x Chanel. The proposal advocated for a strategic and potent fusion, melding the transformative, enduring legacy established by Coco Chanel with the contemporary, purpose-driven branding methodology championed by Meghan. The confidential records, painstakingly recovered from a digital repository that had regrettably fallen victim to a security breach at a highly regarded public relations firm, initially illuminated a facade of sophisticated, quintessentially French-style politeness emanating from the esteemed house of Chanel following initial contact. Yet, peering beneath this polished exterior, the candid internal commentary generated during that inaugural discussion revealed sentiments that were considerably more forthright and unvarnished. Indeed, one particularly influential leader within the company characterized the deportment exhibited by the personnel representing Archewell as distinctly overstepping the established boundaries, and further noted that they were demonstrating a pronounced and regrettable lack of deference toward the venerable, century-old architectural foundation of our brand. Notwithstanding these veiled yet pointed admonitions, arrangements were diligently finalized for a formal presentation to take place on the 14th day of June, in the year 2023, scheduled within the confines of a discreet and secluded conference space affording picturesque vistas overlooking the expanse of Central Park in the bustling metropolis of New York City. That particular assembly would subsequently be indelibly inscribed within the annals of the world of high fashion as the precise juncture at which the nascent connection between the two entities began its irrevocable descent into acrimony and utter combustion. Meghan arrived to this pivotal meeting bearing a digital presentation, a meticulously prepared slide deck, which carried the rather provocative title, Reimagine Chanel, From Exclusivity to Empathy. For the seasoned executives seated opposite her across the expansive table, the very essence of that title was immediately perceived as a direct and calculated act of provocation. The entire financial scaffolding and very ethos upon which the enduring legacy of Chanel has been constructed is fundamentally predicated on the principle of exclusivity. Consequently, the audacious suggestion that empathy should be weaponized or employed as a primary marketing instrument was instantly regarded as a profound dilution, a willful watering down of the very sacred aura surrounding the venerable institution. According to the recollections provided by 3 separate individuals who were present within that tense chamber, the presentation unfolded as a relentless succession of sweeping and uncompromising demands, which were, rather disingenuously, framed as indispensable creative directives. Meghan advanced a series of proposals concerning exquisite silk garments wherein the globally recognized and iconic double C insignia would either be entirely excised from the designs or, at the very least, deliberately paired or subsumed alongside a delicate, subtle floral motif intended to serve as a symbolic representation of Archewell. She passionately argued that the venerable label was urgently in need of a radical metamorphosis in order to successfully engage with a demographic described as a younger and considerably more socially conscious cohort of consumers. Reports filtering out from the location suggest that the palpable tension permeating the atmosphere reached a critical breaking point when the discourse pivoted toward a concept for a proposed collection of accessories crafted from environmentally sustainable materials, specifically handbags. Meghan boldly put forth the idea that the flagship item within this entire collection should be christened with the deeply resonant and emotionally charged name, the Diana. When a legal counsel representing Chanel, seeking clarity and adherence to protocol, formally posed the question as to whether she had successfully secured the requisite formal authorization from either the estate of the Spencers or the esteemed royal collection to proceed with the utilization of the cherished name of Princess Diana for a commercial, profit-generating fashion enterprise, Meghan reportedly leaned forward with pronounced intensity and declared with unyielding conviction, "I carry her legacy within the very core of my very soul. I do not require any form of official sanction or permit simply to offer a heartfelt tribute to my own beloved mother-in-law." A profound, suffocating silence descended upon the entire room, a silence thick with unspoken judgment. One attendee later vividly recalled that the assembled Chanel team members appeared utterly aghast, as if they had just borne witness to an act of profound spiritual profanation. Within the rarefied and fiercely guarded sphere of French haute couture, tradition is not a mere stylistic element to be lightly reworked for the sake of a fleeting news release. Rather, it is considered a sacred, inviolable obligation. Should the unfolding narrative of these dramatic events be proving as utterly captivating to your sensibilities as it is to ours, we earnestly implore you to consider subscribing to this channel without delay. The entire situation rapidly deteriorated, transforming from what was initially a private, high-stakes disagreement into a full-blown organizational crisis in the span of a mere 7 days. In the latter portion of June, in the year 2023, an assortment of inspirational visual materials, allegedly conceived and executed by the design contingent at Archewell, were illicitly disseminated onto a highly restricted, private message board dedicated to fashion commentary, before being swiftly captured and amplified by numerous anonymous gossip websites across the digital landscape. This particular online display showcased historical photographic imagery of Princess Diana elegantly attired in classic Chanel ensembles, which had been digitally overlaid and juxtaposed with monochromatic photographs depicting Meghan adopting precisely identical poses. The overarching, declarative heading accompanying this jarring visual presentation proclaimed, "From grief to glamour, the heirloom line." For the highly specialized legal department situated on the prestigious Rue Cambon, this unauthorized leak instantly served as the undeniable and conclusive proof of malfeasance. It provided irrefutable evidence suggesting that Meghan's true objective was not the pursuit of a genuine, mutually beneficial collaboration, but rather the strategic acquisition of a powerful instrument intended to rewrite her personal narrative by employing the revered, established history of Chanel as a convenient, high-profile backdrop. Consequently, an internal alarm regarding ethical boundaries was immediately triggered throughout the organization. The subsequent internal memorandum, meticulously drafted in the French language and formally circulated among the esteemed members of the board of directors, unequivocally asserted its conclusion. This particular endeavor does not represent any form of brand synergy. This must be unequivocally recognized as a calculated attempt at the unauthorized misappropriation of a globally recognized brand. This individual is clearly seeking to utilize this venerable fashion house as a protective barrier against the difficulties and scrutiny of her own personal controversies. Upon the 26th day of June, in the year 2023, a session of paramount urgency and gravity was formally convened within the venerable city of Paris. Swiftly thereafter, by the arrival of the first day of July, the provisional decree that had been established had been irrevocably cemented into a permanent directive. Subsequently, every single supervisor overseeing the various regional operations was furnished with an explicit and uncompromising mandate designated as a no-go order, which applied with stringent totality to the entirety of the Archwell project. It was unequivocally determined that every conceivable channel of communication and interaction were to be severed and terminated with immediate effect, leaving no room for delay. There was to be a deliberate and absolute absence of any formal written notification conveying the rejection, nor would there be any forthcoming pronouncement disseminated to the media outlets, and certainly no public declaration would be issued to the wider populace. Within the intricate and often ruthless domain of high fashion, the most profoundly chilling and merciless strategy employed for bringing about the demise of an undertaking is the simple yet absolute cessation of supplying it with the vital sustenance of sustained attention and focus. Consequently, this ambitious venture met its expiration in an enveloping and complete silence, a deliberate vacuum where engagement once thrived. However, the repercussions stemming from this calculated erasure were anything but quiet or muted in the closed-door arenas where influential decisions were forged. Individuals positioned in close proximity to the Duchess offered the assertion that she did not process this decisive rejection as a mere pragmatic commercial calculation, but rather perceived it as a profound and deeply personal affront, an intentional slight leveled directly against her. In a series of electronic correspondences that subsequently achieved unauthorized circulation to the public sphere through a clandestine disclosure, it was reported that she conveyed her sentiments to a confidant in unequivocal terms, stating, "They saw fit to leverage my established reputation to generate considerable enthusiasm during their private consultations, only to swiftly slam the door shut the very moment they had successfully extracted the intelligence they coveted. Rest assured, I shall eventually ascend beyond the limitations they impose upon me. That I have always managed to achieve." By the arrival of the springtime in the year 2024, the discernible shift in her public posture had become strikingly evident to those perceptive observers who possessed the requisite insight to recognize the subtle indicators. Meghan began the meticulous process of systematically excising any and all references to the esteemed House of Chanel from her public discourse and conversations. The familiar silhouettes of traditional ballet slippers and the instantly recognizable quilted handbags were systematically relegated to the archives, supplanted instead by selections drawn from the collections of Valentino, Carolina Herrera, and Self-Portrait, a curated selection of design houses perceived to be far more amenable to the potent force of celebrity influence and the rapidly evolving dynamics of modern branding strategies. A former specialist who provided brief consultation regarding the Duchess's hair and wardrobe for a particular high-profile streaming production remarked that the Duchess cultivated an intense preoccupation with demonstrating to the world that she harbored absolutely no reliance upon the approval of the French establishment. She was frequently heard posing the pointed rhetorical question, "Does this ensemble carry sufficient French resonance to effectively communicate my intended message?" At this juncture, the pursuit had evolved far beyond mere questions of aesthetic preference. It had transformed into a calculated quest for recompense enacted entirely through the medium of visual presentation. Nevertheless, this unfolding situation, which some commentators later dubbed the mood board war, inadvertently instigated a secondary repercussion that the strategists surrounding Meghan had failed entirely to anticipate or account for in their planning. The global sphere of high fashion is, in reality, an exceedingly small and intricately interconnected ecosystem where the dissemination of sensitive intelligence occurs with astonishing velocity. The detailed narrative concerning the proposed Diana handbag and the covert maneuvers undertaken to substitute the iconic double C insignia traveled with the speed of an uncontrolled conflagration through the executive halls of the colossal LVMH and Kering conglomerates. It was not solely the venerable establishment of Chanel that was erecting formidable barriers to entry. Rather, the entirety of the uppermost echelon of European luxury goods had been alerted to the situation. By the commencement of the fashion season designated for the year 2025, the Duchess discovered herself positioned within an exceptionally precarious and compromised standing. Her celebrity status had been fundamentally predicated upon her visibility within a field that was, ironically, beginning to pivot toward the understated elegance of quiet luxury and the established aesthetics associated. With inherited wealth, the very foundational elements she had ardently sought to disrupt and overturn. The 12 minutes of profound, Chilling silence observed at the establishment located in Beverly Hills in the year 2026 served as the definitive final stroke of punctuation mark upon a narrative sentence that had been meticulously composed during those fraught and intensely frictional consultative sessions held in 2023. Chanel, having observed the proceedings with measured detachment, maintained its composure, patiently waiting for the opportune moment before ultimately executing its strategic countermove. They had effectively demonstrated a fundamental truth of their dominion. While a celebrated individual may command the fleeting dominance of a daily news headline, it is the enduring fashion house that ultimately controls access to the very doorway of entry. The conflict known as the Mood Board War had reached its inevitable conclusion, and in this contest, the Duchess had not merely fallen short of victory. She had been comprehensively and permanently expunged from that particular landscape of influence. The gilded avenues and hushed salons of Parisian haute couture are habitually sheathed in a precious veneer of utmost discretion. Yet it is precisely within the vacuum of their silence, when the powerful figures within these esteemed circles turn their backs, that a far more resonant weight is conveyed, a quietude that eclipses the significance of any overt physical gesture. This profound stillness functions, in effect, as a complete and utter nullification of a carefully cultivated personal brand. In the unfolding weeks immediately succeeding the very visible and public rebuff encountered at the esteemed Chanel establishment situated in Beverly Hills, there materialized across the most influential and commanding fashion consortiums throughout all of France a withdrawal that was entirely unspoken yet perfectly synchronized. From the exclusive, bespoke boutiques lining the famed Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré to the opulent, high-ceilinged executive suites that afford breathtaking vistas overlooking the historic Place Vendôme, the reigning monarchs of the industry reached a singular, chillingly unified consensus. The person known as Meghan Markle was henceforth to be considered an unwelcome presence within the established trade ecosystem. She had, in their collective estimation, transmuted into a substantial liability demanding immediate quarantine. For those wishing to remain accurately informed regarding the seismic shifts occurring within the intricate world of high fashion, a steady subscription to the relevant channels is strongly advised. Drawing upon intelligence of the highest classification, secured through clandestine means from an individual occupying a senior echelon within the fashion hierarchy, it has been revealed that a secret conclave of industry leaders convened precisely on the 9th day of February in the year 2026. This pivotal session was presided over by an undeniably major personality representing the interests of the celebrated Camille Colbert, that venerable and prestigious organization which serves as the collective voice for the legendary, time-honored luxury houses scattered across the French landscape. The attendance roster for this deeply significant gathering read like a veritable roll call of the masters who command global wealth and taste. There were official envoys dispatched from the colossal LVMH conglomerate, the parent entity overseeing such titans as Dior, Givenchy, and Louis Vuitton, representatives from the formidable Kering Group, the proprietors of globally recognized names including Balenciaga, Saint Laurent, and Bottega Veneta, and, of course, the privately held, immensely powerful giant that is Chanel itself. While no official transcripts or public minutes detailing the proceedings of this clandestine meeting were ever released into the public domain, a partially leaked overview of the discourse that transpired illuminates a cold, meticulously calculated precision in the shared methodology adopted by these magnates. The foundational judgment delivered was utterly transparent and without ambiguity. Until such a time as an official reversal might be declared, the Duchess of Sussex was to be meticulously purged from every primary list concerning invitations to exclusive events, expunged from the entry logs of private showrooms, and deleted entirely from the internal spreadsheets dedicated to managing influencer collaborations. The internal justification underpinning this sweeping decree was officially catalogued under the ominous heading of a PR contamination risk. Within the high-stakes theater of elevated commerce, where the merest fragment of negative viral news has the capacity to instantaneously strip away decades of painstakingly constructed reputational value, the disruptive and highly visible fame associated with Meghan was perceived as a kind of contagion, an unwelcome element that the established industry was resolutely determined to neither accommodate nor tolerate any longer. Even though Chanel had initially taken the most conspicuous and overt steps to enforce this new policy, the other major fashion houses wasted no time whatsoever in cementing this newly established boundary with unyielding resolve. Dior, an institution steeped in history that had long been the quiet subject of persistent speculation regarding a potential major future collaboration with Meghan, swiftly disseminated a discreet but firm internal memorandum to all of its worldwide media relations teams. The instruction contained within was starkly uncomplicated. Cease the provisioning of clothing for any of her forthcoming public engagements and immediately terminate all ongoing lines of communication and interaction with the talent agencies currently representing the household of the Sussexes. Furthermore, even the venerable House of Givenchy, the very label responsible for crafting the iconic and widely celebrated bridal gown worn by Meghan in the year 2018 under the creative stewardship of Claire Waite-Keller, opted decisively for a rigorous strategy of complete and total separation from the complication. While they consciously abstained from issuing any sort of public declaration or commentary on the matter, an individual possessing intimate proximity to the current design staff confirmed the palpable shift in the prevailing attitude, stating emphatically, "Our entire focus remains squarely upon nurturing new, fresh talent and celebrating enduring artistry, rather than becoming entangled in ongoing political disputes." This same source further elaborated with a measured observation. The historical link to those 2018 nuptials remains a treasured piece of our heritage, certainly, but it does not, in any meaningful way, represent the trajectory of our future endeavors. The prevailing trend toward distancing reached its apex when Balmain reportedly moved to abruptly cancel a meticulously scheduled digital promotional event, one that was intended to feature an in-depth, publicized conversation between their creative director, Olivier Rousteing, and the Duchess herself. This ambitious project, centered thematically around the concept of digital feminism, was summarily scrapped a mere 4 days before the scheduled filming date. An executive involved directly in the decision-making process pointed to the insurmountable nature of the peril involved, explaining with pointed clarity, "Every single dialogue, without fail, inevitably devolves into a lengthy list of her grievances rather than remaining a substantive discussion about the clothing itself," the executive articulated. "In the magnificent city of Paris, we are in the business of crafting and selling dreams. Meghan, however, deals primarily in conflict. Those two distinct commodities, dreams and conflict, are fundamentally and entirely incompatible. Concealed behind the shimmering, often deceptive, facade of every grand fashion week spectacle resides an exceedingly complex and finely woven tapestry comprising media specialists, dedicated representatives, and the most esteemed, top-tier stylists, all of whom function as the vigilant, almost gatekeeping, custodians of the coveted front row seating. As the calendar page turned toward the middle of February in the year 2026, the specific designation of the name Meghan had, quite alarmingly, begun to register within the secure databases of these industry insiders as a distinct and immediate warning signal. A notably prominent stylist hailing from the European continent, one who had previously shared a significant professional undertaking with Meghan on a major magazine endeavor way back in 2019, offered a candid assessment of the present, rather unfortunate state of affairs, insisting upon complete anonymity for the duration of the discussion. This influential figure articulated the prevailing mood by stating, "The very instant her name is even tentatively introduced to a luxury fashion label these days, there invariably ensues an extended, weighty silence, which is then swiftly followed by a carefully worded, polite pivot to an entirely different subject. That, my friend, is the universally understood industry semaphore, the silent decree signaling, this specific topic is henceforth forbidden from resurfacing. It is, in essence, a meticulously executed act of professional evasion operating on a truly planetary scale." The tangible ramifications of this sudden and widespread professional chill became exceptionally clear and undeniable when the initial, preliminary roster of invited attendees for the forthcoming Paris Fashion Week, an event scheduled to unfold between the 4th day and the 11th day of March in 2026, was circulated amongst the privileged circle of the media elite. Meghan Markle, an individual who, not so long ago, graced seats situated immediately adjacent to the world's most profoundly influential editorial figures, was conspicuously absent from this enumeration. Her presence was entirely unaccounted for in the front row at the esteemed house of Dior. She could not be located anywhere backstage or in attendance at Schiaparelli's showing. Furthermore, her name was entirely missing from the exclusive guest lists compiled for the most prestigious of the after-show celebrations held at the renowned L'Avenue establishment. For a public figure whose entire personal brand architecture is fundamentally dependent upon the precious currency of access, visibility, and being definitively seen in the correct locations, this profound exclusion represented nothing less than a staggering, precipitous decline in established status and standing. Even as the surrounding atmosphere grew perceptibly colder, the dedicated team responsible for managing Meghan's affairs at the Archwell organization did not resign themselves to inaction, choosing instead to vigorously pursue avenues of redress. Confidential inquiries suggest that her public relations consultancy, the firm known as Elmer Strategies, embarked upon a notably desperate, last-ditch effort to strategically rehabilitate her public image sometime between the 8th day and the 10th day of February. Reports indicate that they reportedly presented a comprehensive portfolio offering no fewer than 5 distinct methodologies for spinning a narrative of reconciliation to major global news outlets. These proposed maneuvers included the securing of a coveted digital cover story centered on the theme of sustainable high fashion, the arrangement of a high-profile podcast collaboration featuring the acclaimed designer Stella McCartney, and even the audacious proposal for a keynote address at a TED Talk, tentatively titled Reclaiming Creative Space. Regrettably, the response emanating from the established world of high-end publishing proved to be just as frigid and unresponsive as the reaction received from the major fashion houses themselves. One senior editor working for a highly respected French publication offered a candid and revealing justification for the industry's stance, confessing, "Our considered judgment in this matter is not, in fact, predicated upon her personal political leanings or affiliations. What we are critically assessing is her demonstrable tendency toward generating and fostering inherent chaos. The moment she steps into any given environment, the very atmosphere seems to suffer a palpable drain, as if the inherent energy is being immediately siphoned away. The very essence of high fashion demands that the meticulously crafted garment must retain its rightful position as the undisputed protagonist of the narrative. With her involvement, however, the enduring protagonist invariably becomes the ensuing dispute or controversy. Across the landscape of French media, the tone of reporting shifted markedly, transitioning from one of mild curiosity to one of pronounced disapproval and critique. Le Figaro, for instance, published a particularly pointed fashion commentary bearing a headline whose translated meaning conveyed the powerful message, "The silence of Chanel, a force more potent than any uttered words." Even the French iteration of Vanity Fair, an outlet that had previously served as a staunch and vocal proponent of the Duchess's sartorial sensibilities, released an analytical piece asserting that she had fundamentally confused mere disruption with genuine authority, and issued a stern caution to its readership that the rarefied world of high fashion is entirely unwilling to bend its established protocols to accommodate the dictates of an individual's ego. The comprehensive worldwide freeze that took hold in the year 2026 ultimately served to underscore a fundamental, immutable truth regarding the underlying architecture of authentic influence. Whereas the celebrity culture prevalent in America often flourishes vigorously amidst incessant clamor, sensational noise, and the fleeting validation of viral moments, the deeply entrenched fashion elite of Europe draws its enduring strength from the lineage of ancestry, a profound commitment to caution, and the sheer, unyielding power encapsulated within the simple, definitive syllable of the word no. By decisively closing their prestigious thresholds, the venerable fashion houses of Paris were engaged in far more than a simple act of slighting a potential patron. They were, in a more profound sense, actively safeguarding an entire, established, and deeply cherished way of doing business and existing within that sphere. As one seasoned veteran of this demanding trade eloquently summarized the situation, "Within this particular world, doors are engineered to swing open with barely a whisper, an almost imperceptible sound. However, when those same doors are deliberately and forcefully slammed shut, the resulting reverberation echoes and persists for an exceptionally long duration." By the midpoint of February of that year, every significant door in the Parisian fashion capital had undeniably produced that resounding closure, leaving the Duchess standing isolated on the cold exterior of a fortress whose command she had once confidently, perhaps mistakenly, believed she could dictate. Be sure to maintain your subscription to our channel to discover the subsequent developments in this unfolding narrative. As the substantial, heavy portals of the esteemed House of Chanel were definitively secured and the entirety of the fashionable city of Paris followed suit in its own manner of closing down, the celebrated figure of Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, made no attempt to retreat into obscurity or silence. Drawing upon intelligence gleaned from a multitude of confidential internal informants, it became immediately apparent that the Duchess swiftly pivoted back toward the established instruments and established methodologies that had, in preceding times, proven remarkably efficacious for her endeavors. The deployment of intricate legal stratagems, the circulation of meticulously crafted, clandestine public relations memoranda, and the deliberate, calculated utilization of her personal narrative as a potent form of leverage and influence. Nevertheless, for the very initial occasion throughout her entire tenure as an individual occupying the glare of public scrutiny, these familiar implements proved utterly incapable of penetrating the formidable, thick ramparts of stone erected by the global fashion establishment. Subsequently, on the 8th day of February in the year 2026, a mere 24 hours having elapsed since the significant confrontation unfolded in the locale of Beverly Hills, the counsel who had long stood as Meghan's legal representative, identified only as Jonathan Y., purportedly convened an urgent, high-stakes consultation with the principal partners at the venerable New York legal institution known as Lehane and O'Donnell. The overarching objective of this intense gathering was to thoroughly investigate the feasibility of initiating a substantial lawsuit predicated upon claims of defamation or outright discrimination directed against the formidable entity of Chanel, citing purported material damage inflicted upon her public standing and reputation. Their internal blueprint, which had been formally christened with the ambitious designation of Project Salvage, sought to artfully construct a legal argument that framed the initial denial of entry as a direct and actionable infraction against the provisions enumerated within the Unruh Civil Rights Act. However, this aggressive legal maneuver was decisively halted, extinguished before it ever had the opportunity to be presented before the bench of any presiding judge. A panel of assorted legal authorities, which notably included a distinguished former magistrate hailing from the California Superior Court, undertook a meticulous examination of the proposed grounds for action and summarily dismissed them, characterizing the legal theories as nothing more than fanciful legal fantasies. Their consensus was clear. There exists no statutory mandate compelling a privately operated fashion establishment to maintain any ongoing professional association with a figure of public notoriety. By the 10th day of February in that same year, the carefully constructed legal offensive was quietly relegated to the archives, yet the ensuing media confrontation had only just begun its protracted escalation. Finding themselves thoroughly rebuffed by the unyielding bulwarks of the judicial process, the team surrounding Meghan initiated what those privy to the inner workings of their strategy term the managed leak. At precisely 17 minutes past the hour of 11 in the morning on the 9th day of February, an internal communication originating from Nadia Campbell, the director of communications at Archewell, was disseminated with great speed to a carefully selected roster comprising more than 40 influential figures within the high echelons of the media landscape. The subject line of this widely distributed missive was pointedly crafted: an ongoing pattern, women of color in luxury spaces. The substantive content of the electronic mail endeavored to transmute the specific incident involving Chanel into a component piece of a much grander, overarching narrative concerning systemic exclusion and the establishment of entrenched gatekeeping mechanisms. The text conspicuously referenced the prior tribulations Meghan had encountered with the journalistic organs of the British press and subtly implied that the sudden, pronounced coolness emanating from the fashion sector was, in fact, rooted in deeply concealed prejudices and biases. While the communication skillfully abstained from explicitly naming the fashion house of Chanel, the intended target of the critique was universally and immediately understood by all recipients. This represented a calculated maneuver designed to harness the prevailing discourse surrounding social justice as an instrument to exert pressure upon a brand that traditionally derives significant prestige from its perceived elevation above the shifting currents of political controversy. The ensuing public reaction, however, proved to be a catastrophic failure for the carefully cultivated brand identity of Archewell. In stark contrast to preceding years when narratives of this nature were often embraced and amplified by the media establishment, the prevailing sentiment across the media spectrum in 2026 was characterized by a palpable, widespread weariness and saturation. Out of the entire cohort of 40 media professionals who were contacted with this carefully worded message, only a single, relatively minor digital publication offered a piece that mirrored the desired sympathetic perspective. The remainder of the recipients, ranging from influential outlets such as The Cut to the globally recognized authority of Vogue, elected to offer absolutely no response whatsoever to the calculated outreach. Within the secluded confines of the Sussex residence situated in Montecito, the atmosphere was reportedly characterized by an intense and pervasive sense of profound alarm. An employee who tendered their resignation on the 10th day of February later recounted that the internal working environment had devolved into a state of noticeable disarray and frantic activity. It was reported that Meghan exerted considerable pressure upon her staff to intensify their focus on leveraging the charitable dimensions of their endeavors, urging them repeatedly to remind the world of everything she had endured in the past. Yet, the general public, it seemed, had demonstrably moved past the prescribed narrative. They were no longer receptive to the established script. In one particularly revealing message that was subsequently divulged from a private WhatsApp exchange, a senior advisor offered a stark warning. "We are losing the interest of the room. The more we focus on the struggle, the further the brands move away." The final, and perhaps most devastating, blow originated from within the very core of the industry itself. On the evening of the 10th day of February, a private electronic mail correspondence authored by Bruno Pavlovsky, the president of Chanel's prestigious fashion division, was illicitly shared without authorization across a specialized digital server reserved exclusively for the use of professionals operating within the fashion sector. The contents of this crucial message, which had been originally composed on the 28th day of January, a considerable period preceding the actual incident that took place on Rodeo Drive, rendered the house's definitive position unequivocally clear and unambiguous. It stated plainly, "There are times when keeping quiet protects the house better than saying something. We cannot be asked to take on chaos just for the sake of a celebrity." The choice regarding M. Markle was about strategy, not feelings. The unfortunate public disclosure of the Pavlovsky message served as the definitive and inescapable indication that the established halls of high fashion had decisively and irrevocably sealed their grand portals against her influence. This single event transformed the perception of the Duchess, shifting her status in the estimation of every significant marketing consortium operating across the entirety of Europe from that of a wronged party to that of a considerable and inconvenient complication. As the middle part of that very week unfolded, the most esteemed and well-connected public relations enterprises situated in the bustling metropolises of New York and the elegant avenues of Paris began the systematic process of inscribing the Duchess's esteemed name onto what are known internally as do not book registries. A particularly senior executive, holding a position of significant authority within one of the foremost agencies of this specialized field, articulated the situation with stark and unvarnished directness during a private exchange within a secure professional communication channel, stating unequivocally, "She no longer possesses the capacity to effectively move merchandise or sell the desired goods. Instead, her presence now exclusively serves to propel the narrative of the news cycle in an unfavorable and counterproductive direction." As the nascent rays of the sun began to illuminate the dawn on the 11th day of February, the Duchess found herself enveloped in a profound solitude, a state of isolation she had never before experienced in her life. Her carefully orchestrated legal maneuvers had proven entirely ineffectual. The calculated releases of information to the media had inadvertently inflicted far greater detriment than any intended benefit, and crucially, her once cherished standing among the influential arbiters of contemporary style and taste had utterly evaporated into nothingness. She had attempted, with considerable force of will, to gain forcible entry into that exclusive, almost sacred enclosure of the elite, yet in doing so, she had tragically overlooked the most fundamental, unwritten commandment of the established high society. In a rarefied sphere where the mere act of receiving an invitation constitutes the sole currency of value, those individuals who resort to attempting to shatter the entranceway are, with almost absolute certainty, destined to find themselves excluded from the subsequent gathering. The detailed findings presented by external investigators were delivered with unwavering certitude. Meghan Markle was no longer engaged in the pursuit of securing a desirable seat at a highly anticipated fashion presentation. Rather, She was locked in an intense and existential battle for the preservation of her professional viability within an industry that had collectively reached a singular and unanimous verdict. It was thoroughly exhausted by the incessant commotion surrounding her persona. The ensuing silence that descended was far more profound than a mere absence of chatter. It represented the palpable sound of a globally recognized, historic brand choosing deliberately to pivot its focus toward a different and less contentious endeavor. By the 11th day of February in the year 2026, precisely 4 days subsequent to the moment the venerable doors of the Chanel establishment on Rodeo Drive had been firmly closed to her prospects, the nature of the engagement had fundamentally transmuted. It had escalated from a mere contest for entry into the inner sanctums of fashion to a desperate, frantic struggle for relevance within the broader cultural landscape. The cascading repercussions stemming from this worldwide professional blacklisting extended far beyond the mere acquisition of high-end apparel. It signified a comprehensive and alarming collapse that placed the entirety of the Sussex's burgeoning business infrastructure under immediate and significant peril. Within the hushed, meticulously protected enclaves of Montecito and across the sleek, contemporary corporate headquarters of Hollywood, this developing reality was being absorbed with a chilling and undeniable clarity. The Duchess had ceased to function as an asset of prestige. She had become, instead, a cautionary narrative intended for the immediate instruction of others. According to pronouncements made by high-level executives at major streaming and video production services, the negative repercussions originating from the unfortunate Chanel episode struck their pipeline of prospective agreements with the force of an overwhelming, destructive tide. Archwell Productions, the creative entity in question, had reportedly been situated at the very final juncture of finalizing an exceptionally large-scale undertaking. A sophisticated documentary series intended to explore the intricate historical nexus between royal lineage and the evolution of global sartorial expression. That specific, highly anticipated project is now being summarily described as definitively deceased by one industry leader. The attributed rationale for this abrupt termination, they clarified, was not rooted in any deficiency within the narrative content itself, but rather in a catastrophic and irreversible deterioration of her public perception. Not a single established, legacy brand, particularly those operating within the rarefied atmosphere of true luxury goods, evinced any desire to be remotely associated with an individual whose primary ongoing public story had become inextricably linked with the stigma of industrial rejection. A comparable cooling of previously warm professional relationships was simultaneously observed at the uppermost echelons of the technological sector in Silicon Valley. Comprehensive blueprints for a brand new, highly anticipated podcast endeavor were placed indefinitely on an indefinite hold after no fewer than 3 substantial corporate sponsors abruptly withdrew their financial backing within a mere 48-hour span following the unsettling developments that transpired in Beverly Hills. The internal justification disseminated to the personnel directly involved in these collaborations was brutally candid. Meghan had regrettably crossed the threshold into a state described internally as brand toxicity. One seasoned marketing professional offered a particularly sharp observation, noting that her appeal had completely dissipated among the demographic of consumers who held the actual purchasing power and dictated market trends. Instead of cultivating an atmosphere of aspiration and inspiration among the public, her presence now primarily generated news cycles dominated by reports of litigation and interpersonal conflict, the 2 categories of subject matter that large, risk-averse corporations endeavor most assiduously to avoid. The closely knit social fabric of California, which had initially embraced the arrival of the royal couple with such effusive warmth, has likewise begun a noticeable process of withdrawal and distancing. Residents of the Montecito community, speaking under conditions of strict confidence, have articulated a palpable sense of mounting tension permeating the atmosphere. Formal invitations to the most prestigious philanthropic galas, the very events that traditionally animate and define the social calendar of the state, have become exceedingly rare. Even those influential media figures who had formerly served as her most staunch and vocal champions, such as Oprah Winfrey and Gayle King, have maintained an uncharacteristic and conspicuous silence throughout this period of professional adversity. As one longtime local observer eloquently summarized the consensus, the collective industry has arrived at a unified, measured conclusion, executed with remarkable calmness. This particular, high-profile experiment has reached its definitive and necessary conclusion. Perhaps the most profoundly startling alteration, however, is the subtle, yet significant shift occurring within the very walls of the Sussex's residence itself. Individuals intimately acquainted with the familial dynamics have been relaying reports suggesting that Prince Harry has initiated a series of hushed, clandestine telephone conversations, meticulously exploring any conceivable avenue that might permit his reinstatement into some capacity of service within London. It is crucial to emphasize that this hypothetical scenario does not envision a full restoration to the status of a working senior royal devoted to the crown's official duties. Rather, it postulates a far more discreet, quiet return, one primarily dedicated to his former charitable endeavors and work conducted far from the relentless glare of public scrutiny. Nevertheless, the response emanating from the United Kingdom has reportedly been exceedingly firm and uncompromising. It is understood, according to sources connected to the offices of Princess and Lady Louise Windsor, that any potential pathway for the Duke's reintegration is contingent upon a single, immutable condition that simply cannot be negotiated or altered. The Duchess must remain entirely excluded from any such arrangement. A source who maintains a professional relationship with the royal household articulated this position with absolute clarity, stating emphatically, "The family remains perfectly content to contemplate matters concerning their son, but they have reached a definitive end regarding the persistent drama. There exists no viable route for the return of both individuals together. The choice, starkly presented, lies between his inherited sense of duty and the narrative they have endeavored to construct and perpetuate from their life in California." Prince Harry, who was reportedly deeply unsettled and shaken by the public humiliation inflicted upon his wife by a particular brand that he once held in the highest esteem, believing it to represent the absolute pinnacle of global recognition, is said to now find himself ensnared in an agonizing predicament, caught precisely in the middle of these conflicting forces. He witnessed the global stage cease its complicity and pretense on the 7th day of February, observing firsthand that the protective barriers surrounding the Sussex brand were far more fragile and susceptible to collapse than he had ever allowed himself to imagine. Furthermore, the financial underpinnings of their current endeavors are reportedly deteriorating rapidly. The Archwell Foundation has documented a substantial and alarming decline in the volume of private contributions it receives, exacerbated by the recent withdrawal of financial backing from two previously significant donors. This evolving state of affairs raises pertinent questions regarding the sustainability of their current model and compels one to consider the broader implications for future collaborations between prominent figures and commercial entities.